on our next panel, which is also turning back to the electrification of transit. And panel 3 is focused here on transit strategies for full fleet electrification. We called it the good, the bad, and the lessons learned. And since we've heard an in-depth, we're going to invite Anne-Marie. Come on up. Oh yeah, come on up, Anne-Marie. They just took control and sat themselves, so this is all very good. We're chipping along here. On this panel, what our intention was to make sure that folks got a chance to hear from the belly of the hyena, from the core of the transit agency. And a lot of times, if you go around to these conferences, as we do in North America and Europe, you'll see that there's a lot of manufacturers, a lot of integrators, but not always a lot of transit agencies in the audience or on the panel. And everybody wants to know 3-4 years into electrification, what are the experiences of transit? What are the good experiences, the bad, and the lessons learned? And to the extent that there is data to share already, we're quite keen to see some of those data. And some of our folks here on the panel have excellent insights to share with you. I think you're going to find this extremely enlightening. And so just to recap what we said this morning, 5 years ago, we were still trying to convince people. Now where we are in terms of transit agencies represented here across from west to east, from TransLink in British Columbia out to Toronto and surrounding communities, what we've got here are leadership-run and oriented transit agencies that are now trying to iron out the wrinkles and get to full fleet procurement. So an exciting time ahead. With that, I'll introduce from my left to right our speakers today. Our first speaker is Mike McCass, Senior Manager of Vehicle Engineering at Toronto Transit Commission, and definitely on the front lines of the electrification strategy and the procurement that we've heard about so much today. Scott Gilner, who's Senior Advisor of Transit Policy at Brampton Transit, who has loads of experience and has lived through everything that Anne-Marie Carroll referred to earlier in terms of Brampton Transit being one of the first transit agencies to propose standardization of electrification and being part of our Pan-Canadian Electric Bus Project. We've got Don Repta from TransLink as Senior Sustainability Advisor, and Don and I had the chance just last week to sit on a panel together laughing about the good old days, not really, sort of sharing war stories. And so Don's got a lot of good experience to share with you from TransLink now that the buses have launched. And of course, Anne-Marie Carroll joins us again from York Region Transit to share additional insights into YRT's deployment for electrification. So I'd like to welcome this panel and the insights that you're about to share with us. With that, I'll turn first to Mike McCass from Toronto Transit Commission. It's just the big green button there. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank Kutrick for inviting the TTC to this event. I'm very happy to be here. I apologize if some of you have already seen this presentation. There's some slight changes. I think we'll have some more exciting information at the next panel where we'll actually share some data. But this presentation is really meant to guide you through how we got where we are today and where we're going next. And so just before I get into the presentation, I think TTC in the past has been criticized for being very conservative when it comes to adopting new technology, and I think part of that isn't accurate. We were one of the first adopters of hybrid buses in the early 2000s. We lived through the growing pains. They were beta versions, and we lived through those pains, and that really made us think twice about being early adopters of new technology, having a large fleet and taking on that risk when really we need to deliver service to our residents of the city of Toronto. But I look at this like the perfect storm right now. So how did we get here? Back in 2015, we started looking at alternate fuels, alternate technologies, seeing what's in the market. What could we potentially trial, pilot? Could we go out and buy to reduce greenhouse gases, reduce operating costs, improve reliability? And then the perfect storm happened. You had the City of Toronto who released their Transform TO target to reduce greenhouse gases in the city by 80% in 2050. And then you had PTIF, so the federal government came in with a funding opportunity, 50 cents on the dollar. It only happens once every 10 to 15 years. And that was a huge opportunity for us when you're looking at new technologies and mitigating some of that risk and that capital investment. Having some of that partially funded by the feds is massive. And so we went on and decided that we were going to get into electric buses as well. And we came up with our own target of going zero emissions, solely buying zero emissions buses in 2025 and on. and trying to achieve a fully zero emissions fleet by 2040. And that could be a mix. It's zero emissions, even though we're focused here right now on electric buses. I will say that it's not just electric buses, there's potential for other technology, including fuel cell or something else that might come up. So this table is our fleet plan. So I'm proud to say that in 2018 was the last clean diesel bus we bought. Moving forward, we only plan on buying a mix between hybrids and battery electric for the next 5 years leading into 2025. It's a gradual ramp up of electric buses in that mix. And then in 2025 on, we would plan to buy only electric buses or zero emissions buses. I will say the one problem with this is that currently none of these procurements are funded. So we only have funded procurements up until 2019. Anything beyond 2019 is currently not funded. But the good news is that we do have funding to continue with feasibility studies to work on the design of our facilities for the charging infrastructure and the smart charging system that would then integrate local energy and our dispatching software and assist with the operations of these buses and new technology. So just a quick recap timeline. So in May, we received our first electric bus from New Flyer. That bus was subsequently commissioned and put into service June 3rd. Just a couple weeks back in August, we received our first Proterra, and we're currently undergoing commissioning. I think we have, as of today, I think we have 8 on property. And in October, we expect to receive our first BYD bus. And then in Q1 of 2020, we expect to receive the last of the 60 buses that we are procuring as part of this program. And then in March of 2020, we expect to have a substantial completion of a backup generation. One of the issues we see with electric buses is the risk with power outages and how to mitigate that risk and add resiliency into our fleet. So we decided that we would have backup generation that would be CNG powered to protect us in case there is power outages. So just a quick recap of our program. We're buying 3 different types of buses from 3 different vendors. All 3 buses very different, other than that they're 40-footers. When you look at the electrical propulsion system, they all bring different approaches to the table, from the design, where you have a single traction motor to a single traction motor coupled with the transmission to a dual in-wheel traction motor system. Even with the charging, they're very unique, where 2 use DC charging using the SAEJ 1772 protocol, and then BYD has their proprietary AC charging system. But besides the propulsion system, the buses are very different. The body construction is different, where you have a composite body versus a stainless steel body versus a carbon steel body or frame. You have different HVAC systems, different door systems. I mean, the list goes on. So our program really, and I know that we call it a pilot, but to me, it's not a pilot, it's a program, because we bought these buses, and we plan on keeping them for their full life cycle. We plan on studying them and understanding what the impacts are of that full life cycle with respect to, operating costs, maintenance costs, reliability, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. So we plan really, our program, the focus is to run these buses and understand all these different systems on these buses and the different design approaches that each one of these OEMs took to help formulate our next procurement spec. When we go back on the street and buy more electric buses, hopefully this time we'll be buying a TTC electric bus, and it'll likely be a blend of all the good features from all these 3 buses that we're trying today. So when we talk about infrastructure, again, we had 3 buses, and we decided that it wouldn't be fair to our operating garages to saddle them with 3 different bus types, all introduced at the same time. So we decided that we'd have to separate them or segregate the buses by division. So we have 3 divisions that we selected that will be each running one of those bus OEMs. And we tried to spread it across the city. And so part of the thinking that took place when selecting garages was really to understand first off, the skill set at that site. We have 697 legacy hybrids in our fleet operating at various divisions. So we had a leg up on some other agencies because we had some high voltage experience and electric propulsion system experience and controls. So we kind of looked at those divisions first, as those are the optimal places to put an electric bus as kind of a gradual increase in technology. And then we looked at energy available on site. So the program had a deadline with the PTIF deadline where we knew we couldn't install substations or get massive amounts of energy at the site. So we had to understand how many buses could we charge, what's the energy available. So we had to look at what's the size of the transformers, how much energy is being used today, and what can we charge? We came up with 10 buses, and we were then challenged by our board to go to double the fleet, from 30 buses to 60 buses, which we now are going to accomplish by introducing energy storage. So the energy storage will get us over the hump for the extra buses that we are charging. We don't have energy on site available, but we will be using energy storage that we would charge during the day and then deplete at night to supplement that charge. I see I'm running out of time here. So planning for the future, we've done some studies. Qtric's modeled our entire bus network to identify which routes are prime for today's technology of depot charged buses, which routes are optimal for opportunity charged buses, and then maybe a supplement of routes that maybe you need to look at other technologies, whether it be fuel cell or something alternate like a hybrid. So with today's technology, we feel that roughly 50% of our service can be satisfied between short runs and swing runs. And then we have another complement of probably another 30% that could be satisfied with kind of the next generation of buses with more energy on board and a higher charging power, which we foresee happening in the next 5 to 10 years that technology will be here. And so right now what we're doing is a feasibility study of all our 7 garages to understand what the effort required to get the energy there and what kind of real estate space we have. What does the charging infrastructure look like? We think it's going to be an overhead approach just to maintain our storage density in our depots. And again, I mentioned earlier that our bus procurement program is not funded for a few outer years. So, we're looking at market engagement to see if there's any public-private partnership opportunities out there. And then, of course, we want to do a future state route and energy optimization study. I think it's obvious that at some point, all agencies need to look at the routes and possibly modify them to accommodate some of this technology and find efficiencies. So this chart here is really a chart representing what we forecast for, fuel and energy savings from switching our fleet, looking at our fleet plan and the different mix of buses that we have retiring today and the outer years and what their fuel consumption is and what we forecast is going to be our energy costs. And you got a higher and upper and lower limit, which is really kind of a risk where we don't know what energy costs are going to be when we have a large fleet. We have some forecasts from Toronto Hydro what we think it'll be, and so that's really a range of kind of best case, worst case scenario of what the savings will be. But they're very substantial, between upwards of $30 million all the way to almost $50 million once we have a full fleet electrification. And of course, complementary to that similar trend, it's the GHG reductions, where we're looking at when the fleet's fully electrified, you see reductions of 200,000 tons of GHG. This is just a quick snapshot of what we envision for the future. It's kind of having a microgrid at our divisions where you have energy coming in. That would go through a substation, which would then take also energy from on-site solar energy and feed into a smart charging system that would also manage the energy storage that we would use for peak demand shaving, and backup generation. And this will all be controlled through a smart, intelligent energy control system that would take into consideration dispatching of buses, what state of charge is, what the state of charge needs to be for whatever route that bus is going to be deployed to the next day, and try to find efficiencies in optimizing the whole operations, which is a huge challenge. So recommendations, first and foremost, engage with your local utility company. If you're really thinking of going electric, you got to start talking to your local utility company. Understand what the energy is that you have at your facility, what you're using today, what's the balance of energy available, and also identifying what kind of challenges you're going to see if you want to go full electrification. How far are you from a transformer station? How much effort is it to bring that power to your site? Analyze and model your routes. You don't know what you don't know. There's plenty of data now in the market. There's plenty of tools. Qtric has done a good job of modeling our routes, and it's actually very accurate to what we're seeing today. So you need to understand what that mix is between your fleet. If you want to electrify at a very fast pace, you will have a mixed fleet between depot charged buses and en route charged, and you need to analyze your routes to understand which ones are those that would be depot versus en route, and what divisions they operate out of, and what makes sense for your operations. Look at SOPs. Your operations are going to change. We encourage you to do like a tabletop exercise. We did it. We called it like a day in the life of an e-bus. What changes? What's different between a diesel bus versus an e-bus when it comes to bring the bus in? Where do you park it? How do you clean it? Who's charging it? Who's monitoring the charging? Who's dispatching it? What are your rules for dispatching? What do you do if the bus breaks down in service? What if there's dummy lights that come on the dashboard. How do you handle them? Do you take a bus out of service? Do you keep it in service? So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. And probably the most important point is my last point, which is don't wait. Everybody's complaining about the technology being expensive. It is expensive, but guess what? The more people that buy buses, the lower the costs will come down. And you don't know what you don't know. So even if you're only buying one bus, if your agency doesn't have the capital to buy a large fleet like we are doing, and mind you, it's not because we have money, but we've taken advantage of federal funding opportunities. But the reality is that you don't know what you don't know, and if you even have one bus, you can learn so much from one bus as far as how it performs in your routes, because every agency is going to be different based on duty cycles, based on routes, profiles, topography, loading, and understand what the impact is to your operations. What's the maintenance like? How are your operators going to adopt to this? How are your maintainers going to adopt to it? How are you going to manage your charging events and dispatch buses? So even if you start with one bus, it's better than doing nothing and sitting idly and waiting for everybody else to do studies and coming into the game after the fact. And I'd want to also say that by coming in and experimenting with these buses, you actually have a chance to influence the design of these buses and software and solutions that are coming out right now that are really being driven by agencies like TTC and New York City and Brampton and TransLink and York and all these other agencies that are going to try these buses and identify issues in their operations and find solutions which then OEMs will work towards satisfying their needs, and then agencies that haven't participated kind of fall behind, and by the time you come to the game, you're going to have to adopt to how we do things, because no one's going to want to customize something just for your operations. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. So if anybody was in doubt previously about the passion at TTC about this program, let that be settled. There's an oodles of passion and a very large amount of passion at the electrification team at TTC, and we're excited to be working with them. And with that, I'll turn to Scott Gilner at Brampton Transit, who's been around town for the last few years trying to make this happen, and we're excited to hear what has come of all these efforts.
So good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here to provide an update on Brampton's e-bus program and our experience to date. I'm going to speed through the slides as quickly as I can, but probably not as quick as Josipa. So that's one thing I have learned working with over the last 5 years: talk quickly and get your message through. So first and foremost, Brampton is a green city. The city of Brampton's committed to becoming more healthy, resilient, and environmentally sustainable. Brampton Transit's committed to providing innovative solutions to provide high-quality services that reduces operating costs and improves the overall carbon footprint and GHG reductions. So a bit of background on Brampton, just before we get into it, to give some context. Brampton, for those of you that don't know, we're known as Canada's flower city, so hence the environment. We're the 9th largest city and one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. We're outpacing the national average in terms of population growth by 2.5 times. Our current population's about 650,000, expected to grow to 1 million by 2040. And we have one of the youngest census population bases in Canada, with the average age of 34.7 within the Toronto area. So very high expectation in terms of technology and environmental sustainability. We currently operate 441 buses in our fleet. We operate only rubber wheel transit. We operate a bus reliable transit service, to couch Paul's phrase from the keynote this morning. Love that. It's called the Zoom service, and out of that we have about 123 diesel electric hybrid buses. 80 of them are 60-foot, 43 or 40-foot, and we're seeing about a 23%, up to a 23% reduction in fuel savings, equating to about 4,000 tons of GHG reduction per year. So that's about almost close to 30% of our fleet is currently diesel hybrid electric. So we are transitioning. To top off the growth issue, our ridership growth has far exceeded the national average of about 1.5% in 2017. Our growth was 18% in 2017, 14% growth in 2018. So we're growing, and that's definitely a challenge that we need to make. So in terms of the QTRIC project, obviously we're going to be looking at the performance, maintenance, and customer experience of electric buses versus our diesel hybrid versus diesel. The project's been recognized as a global first, and with that we have the great opportunity to claim the largest global deployment ever to date of fully interoperable battery electric buses and high-powered overhead opportunity chargers. We'll have 80 buses and 4 chargers, which I'll get into. And the total project value is about $16 million, with 70% And again, I say that again, 70% of funding coming from the federal government. So thank you, Government of Canada. It's something that we don't expect to ever happen again, but certainly we're thankful that they were able to step to the plate and solve our funding gap. So we're currently in the pre-procurement bid phase with our 4 vendors, and we anticipate delivery of our buses next year, so we'll be happy to report back at that time. So in terms of the buses themselves, we're going to be acquiring 6 New Flyer Excelsior Charge, 200 kilowatt batteries on board, 2 NovaBus LFSEs with 76 kilowatt batteries on board. And Mike alluded to the fact that there are different strategies for different bus types, different battery capacities. You know, the New Flyer buses tend to be a bit heavier, but have a longer range, so less frequent charging, whereas the NovaBus are a bit lighter. You can accommodate more passengers. However, the cost is more frequent charging. So you really have to balance off which routes these buses are traveling on, and that's part of the phase 1 study. We are going to be op-charge compliant J3105-1, inverted pantograph down to the bus, which is expected to be approved by the end of this year, hopefully. In terms of our routes, we've pre-selected 2 routes. We went through a fairly rigorous process to select these 2 routes as part of our phase 1 trial. We wanted a high percentage of success for phase 1, obviously, so we've decided not to include the battery electric buses as part of our BRT, just given the extensive demands on the BRT service and the expectation of reliability of that service. We'll consider that for a future phase. So we are electrifying 2 routes. The Route 23 Sandalwood runs east-west across the city. There'll be opportunity chargers placed at the westerly terminus as well as the easterly terminus, and unique to this project, we're actually installing an overhead high-power charger at our Sandalwood transit facility for maintenance purposes rather than plugging in overnight. So those are the 2 routes. In terms of the civil works, that's been an ongoing challenge. We look forward to working with our partners at Siemens and ABB to provide us a full turnkey solution on the chargers, which is another unique trait that we're bringing to this project. We are expecting a full turnkey solution. This location's our westerly terminus. It's the northern end of a GO station. We're going to have 2 opportunity chargers installed there, working with our utility in the area of Electra. Similar setup at our easterly terminus, which is our Queen and 50 location. This is a BRT stop, and it's also shared currently with YRT, York Region Transit. So to Anne Marie's point, we need to start working together to understand the future, and in the future we could actually see YRT e-buses coming into that terminal and charging at this location as well. So it's a great strategic location for us. So let's talk a bit about influencers in terms of going electric. And certainly the first and foremost is you need a strategic direction. If you don't have that, you're going to have a hard time getting any approvals. You're going to have a hard time getting any funding. You need strategic direction. So if you don't have that, get that first. That would be my advice. Thankfully, our council, just this past June, declared a climate emergency declaration. So basically, we've got a target similar to TTC, where we need to reduce GHG emissions by 80% by 2050. We also have a Brampton Vision 2040, which is the city's vision to 2040, and part of that vision is being a green city. That's supported by our Grow Green Environmental Master Plan, our Community Energy and Emissions Reduction Plan, which, interesting to note, the orange, I know you can't read the graph, but the orange, just looking at the color, is showing transportation in Brampton in terms of GHGs. So it's 59% of GHGs within Brampton is created within the transportation sector. So obviously, as the public transit agency in Brampton, we need to step up and be champions and stakeholders and leaders in that. We have a zero energy emissions and management plan getting to zero carbon. That's more prevalent for our facilities. And we also have our Brampton Transit Business Plan, and future iteration of that will include a green fleet strategy to get us there. So our next step in 2020 is report to council across the city and how the city transit, being part of that, will achieve that target by council. The other influencer obviously is the savings. So when you start talking about savings, you're looking at a return on investment. You look at the ROI in terms of buses only, and we're anticipating about a $3.6 million return on our 8-bus investment over an 18-year bus life. And that's including the fuel savings and the maintenance savings that were expected as part of our modeling. The unknowns obviously is the gray area, we call it, the scary area where we don't know what we don't know, to Mike's point. We don't know anything about ongoing maintenance for overhead and on-street chargers. Brampton Transit is not in the electricity business. It's not part of our business. And another unique aspect of the project in Brampton, Brampton Transit, City of Brampton, will be owning the 4 electric chargers. It's an asset we've never owned before. We don't operate them currently, so that's a scary thing for us. And obviously the additional service planning impacts, running time and vehicles as well are unknowns. And electricity as a fuel is an unknown to us. You know, we're a transit agency, we run on diesel, we're comfortable running on diesel, we're comfortable with hybrid electric because it's diesel, but we're now completely switching a fuel source, which is completely different for us. So challenge in terms of funding, the F word, Anne-Marie used it earlier. I can underscore that. Having lived through this with Yosipa for the last 3 years, it's taken a long time to get us to where we're going. I think the key message here is we need predictable, sustainable, dedicated funding that is bipartisan, that's centrally managed, that's streamlined, and it's easy to access for the transit agencies. It's really challenging trying to secure federal funding, provincial funding, municipal funding, get municipal approvals, all within the window of an OEM's manufacturing schedule. So very, very challenging. The infrastructure, you need a transition plan to get you from diesel to somewhere in the middle to eventually fully electric. So start thinking about that now. As many people have said today, it's not going to happen overnight, and we don't expect it to either, but we've started that process. Limitations on existing infrastructure, space constraints around your locations. You're not going to have the space all the time to deal with what you have to deal with. And, you know, in terms of Brampton's growth, we've got 440 vehicles, as I said earlier. We're going to be growing that to 900 vehicles by 2035. So that's a significant investment, over 450 vehicles over the next 15, 20 years. We're buying those buses now for a 15 to 18-year bus life. So the decisions we make today will affect us tomorrow, and it'll affect future years' procurements of buses as well. Timing, expertise, and resourcing. I'll just touch on the timing. Aligning the stars is difficult, as I mentioned. Be aware of electoral cycles. Yosipa mentioned it earlier. I can't underscore that enough. We need to be more strategic in how we time our projects, and be aware of this at the federal, provincial, and municipal level, because it does absolutely have an impact on your projects. And make sure you're getting the appropriate resourcing and buy-in for the project. Key lessons learned, funding and timing. Make sure you have the funds aligned with your timing. Consortium, going it alone. One of the key benefits to joining a consortium is de-risking and sharing that risk with the OEM. So Brampton couldn't do this alone, and we're thankful to be part of this consortium-led project. Procurement and modeling and scope. So basically, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is it's not a one-to-one replacement. You need a dedicated project team. You need to have resources in place, including a project manager, following project management methodology. You can't do this as part of your existing business. And that's what Brampton's doing now. We're feeling the pain, but as we start to transition, we're taking those lessons learned as we move forward. And that's all I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. So a lot more lessons to learn as we go forward in the next year procurement. I'm looking forward to having you back to tell us what you went through. Somebody who has gone through it now and has come out the other end, and the buses are now launching. We're about to start collecting those data is Dom Repta. Dom at TransLink is going to share with us a little bit about those experiences. And I think also, Dom, you have a bit of data that you're going to be able to share as well.
Mine's more full fleet, but I can talk to some as well.
That's great. Thanks so much, Don.
Yeah, so thank you. So we did just launch 2 buses in service right now, then 2 more at the end of the month, part of the Q-Trek trial. So 2 Nova, 2 New Flyer, 1 ABB Charger, 1 Siemens. So my presentation is on, we've done a full fleet, kind of full low carbon fleet transition plan. The learnings we are going to get from the Q-Trek trial will definitely feed into kind of our full fleet plan, which is great. Is it just this one here? It's just the big green one. Okay, so TransLink, who are we? We kind of do everything under the sun other than fly planes. But the crucial thing for us is we have 160 million riders last year. That's almost 500, for our bus fleet only. That's almost 500,000 people a day. So while headlines are great, we're going to fully electrify by 2030 or 2040 or 2025, We need to understand that that is great for climate change and we have to do it. But if we do change too fast and one person misses a doctor's appointment, is late for work, that's one person too many. So while we want to make the change, we have customers to serve first. So that is always in the back of our mind. You know, my CEO calls mine and my director every day. How come we only have 4? Why don't we have 50? Why are we making these commitments? And I said, well, we will, but we still need to think about our service here. So the good. It was an amazing day that we had on Wednesday where we launched our Q-Trick trial. And 4 buses, 2 chargers, took 2.5 years to do. So we have 1,496 more to go. Because we're running 1,500 buses, and we do have a commitment to. The commitment was made to only buy battery buses out of 2025 and on. We'll see if that's going to be exactly how it goes. But again, that 2.5 years of information that we got was invaluable. We started with a team of 4 or 5 of us at TransLink, the head office, thinking 4 buses, 2 chargers. We got the locations, we got the buses, we got technology. They're all trusted OEMs in this field. How hard can it be? We had a weekly call twice a week, and the team grew to 30 people on every call. So the resources to put in 4 buses and 2 chargers cannot be understated. And not to dissuade anybody, because it's well worth it and it's what we need to do. But when you're thinking of who's on your team, what expertise do you need? I'm sitting as a senior sustainability advisor. I don't know anything about scheduling. I don't know anything about maintenance. I don't know, well, it sounds like I don't know anything, but I don't know anything about, how electrons go from A to B. I can project manage and maybe give a good presentation. But the amount of partners that we needed with this was just phenomenal. So I just can't understate the knowledge of your operational companies and people who've been there 20 years, 30 years, the mechanics, everybody for this was instrumental for us. So we have a lot of lessons learned. Anyways, we were tasked to come up with a full fleet electrification plan from 2020 to 2050. So this is what we're doing. I put this slide up. So we have a procurement strategy where we have basically 500 buses by 2027. And then after that, we have a bit of a break in our procurement. So that's a third of our fleet. If we miss this opportunity, if they were all diesel buses, that's 800,000 tons of GHG that we miss out on. Now, again, it makes my head spin a little bit, thinking of how much work we have to do here. But this is a massive, massive opportunity for TransLink to kind of make this change that we need. The big thing is that if we want to start doing this in 2023, we need to start planning basically now, whether it's depot charging, en route charging. I will say we do have those 4 buses on Route 100. By 2021, we plan to have 19. So we are procuring those. The infrastructure's in place, so that's the easy part at least. So this is a really big challenge. So with our low carbon fleet strategy, what we did is said, what's the current state of technology today? We have 1,500 buses. Just like you said, we're not going to do it just at a depot, and we're not going to do it just en route. We have 7 depots, and we're building a new depot that will have capacity. Originally, we thought for 350, but looking at infrastructure needs, I think we're getting down to the 280 point. So what we did is said, well, current state of technology, let's look at our current route. Half of our buses go over 250 kilometers a day, more or less. Some of them go up to 700 kilometers a day. Well, current state of technology that we think is that a depot charge bus, and we're planning it for mid-life capacity of the bus, not sticker price day one. We think at mid-life, a depot charge bus at 440 kilowatts is not going to go 300 kilometers. Maybe they'll prove us wrong. So that means for today's planning, we need to plan half of our buses, we're planning half for depot, half are en route. Maybe, if somebody can, if technology changes, which we think it'll improve, that will change. It's very scary for a transit agency to think about having a ton of infrastructure that you own or don't own out into the environment. Now, we have a trolley network in TransLink. We have 262 trolley buses, so we are used to having some infrastructure throughout the system, but adding in 100 chargers throughout the system scares people. Not owning that infrastructure, which is a proposition that we may consider, is even scarier. Transit agencies generally own and operate all the infrastructure. So what we did, we said, okay, well, let's look at what our en route charging network would look like for half of our buses. The other half we'll save for depot charging. So this is Metro Vancouver. We say we need, we'll call it 100. 100 overhead, 450 kilowatt hour ports. Now, those big circles, that's 13 ports, chargers at one location. The amount of space you need for 13 ports at one location is a lot. I don't know, from here to that wall, or Steve, you would know, how big is the footprint of all the charging infrastructure you need? It's massive. Yeah, so Steve from BC Hydro is a massive partner for us. So I don't know, so this is really scary when you look at this. If you have 100 chargers, I will say what's key though is we partnered with BC Hydro, which has been amazing. So what they did for us is they went, pretty much assessed every site and said, what infrastructure is there? What do you need? What's the timing? And what's the cost upgrades? So they provided all that for free. There's some benefit for them in the end, we hope. And so we kind of did this analysis. Would this be hard, kind of medium hard, or easy to do? Then we looked at our own costs and said, well, what do we need to do to make these a reality? So it's quite challenging. I mean, putting in 100 charging ports throughout the system, could we do this in 10 years? I mean, we just took, I said, a couple years to do this demonstration, which we think would be accelerated. But just construction, permitting, BC Hydro schedule, we're not the only game in town. There's large fleets, there's personal vehicles, massive growth. So there's a lot of competition to do this. I think we're an essential service. Maybe we should get some priority, but that's not my call. The thing is, this is not a 2 or 3 or 4 year project. This could be a 20-year project. So timing is of essence. Then we went into our depot charge. So this is generally a 70-slide presentation, just so you know, down to 7 or 8. We went to depot charging and said, okay, what we think the current state of the battery is in 7 years, but then also let's look at what, if you turn the heaters on full blast on a 0-degree day, what does that do to the battery? Well, our kind of information of networking with other trans agencies, which have been really great sharing information, we think that we could get 170 kilometers at midlife on a 0-degree day in Vancouver. It does go to 0 and below in Vancouver, it gets to minus 20 some days. So this is a real impact. Then we said, if we had one 0-degree day in Vancouver, what does that do for our depot buses? So that chart on the left, that 1.4, 1.3, 1.6 you see, is compared to a diesel bus, how many more buses do we need, a battery electric bus, to do the same service a diesel bus would do? That's on one day. We have more than one day. That's 0 degrees. So you're looking at numbers of 1.4, 1.3, 1.6. We can't underserve because it's cold out. So what does this mean? This means an extra $400 million in buses for some cold days. Now, the option is, of course, use a fuel heater, which solves the problem. The problem is saying you have zero-emission fleet and saying you're using diesel heater or propane heater isn't exactly the message we want out there. Our marketing team hates it. We don't like it. The greenhouse gas impacts are quite small. I think we go from a 95% reduction to a 91%. So it's not major, but it's still enough, and it's just not where we want to be. So we've done some testing already with the buses that we have, and the heating draw is as much as we figured it would be currently. So for any of the battery OEMs up there, we need, if you could work on this, that'd be great for us. What do I have left? So I'm out of time. So I'm just going to flip through this. The good. Greenhouse gas. So we did a whole greenhouse gas assessment. Of course, not surprising that we see massive greenhouse gas reductions from our baseline fleet. Partnerships. I should have put Q-Trick up here. Sorry, Josipa. They've been one of our best partners for this whole thing. I'm just going to, here, I'll just give you a high. That's better than a logo. That's much better than a logo. You see an outlier here, Fortis BC. Someone said it's not all about electrification. We do buy RNG as well because we have a CNG fleet. But BC Hydro, New Flyer, Nova Bus, Siemens, ABB have all been fantastic. Utilities are key. We're working with BC Hydro, and I'm not joking. They have done hundreds of hours of work for us on our low-carbon fleet strategy. We're also working with them on a special EV rate, so to give us an incentive to do what we need to do faster. We're also working with them in BC. We have a carbon credit program. So can we get the money if we electrify our fleet now? So that's a conversation they're really open to. What do I have left? Oh, one more after this. So working with your utility is mandatory. The good news is, I'm going to just go the graph on the bottom, is it's a shift from operational capital. We figure the next 30 years, it'll cost about $1.2 billion to do our whole overhaul, but we'll have about $1.2 billion in savings, primarily from fuel cost savings. So it's a change in thinking of getting that return on investment in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but it's a long-term strategy. And for now, we think this is like at today's what we think, and we think it'll get better. So the good news is there's a payback, and that's my 10 minutes. Thanks. 8 minutes.
I know what you're all thinking. Because he gave me a hug, I gave him an extra couple minutes, and it's true. So there we go. With that, I'm going to turn to Anne-Marie Caron. I think, Anne-Marie, did you want to add any additional comments? I'll invite you up here if you have some additional comments you'd like to add. Up to you? Yeah? All right. Anne-Marie, come on up for some additional comments. And I think most of us will recollect it was a fantastic presentation. You gave us a lot of insight, and anything in addition on the full fleet electrification strategy would be appreciated.
Well, thank you. I thought these three gentlemen here used up all my time, so I wasn't sure that I was going to get any. Anyways, I really don't have a lot to add, but I think just watching all the presentations from these three gentlemen here and even mine, you can see that we have all things in common. We have the same challenges, we have the same fears, and we all have the same funding dilemma and how we're going to fund our conversion over to electric buses. So I think it's really important to have organizations such as Qtrix make sure that we all continue to be aligned as we're going forward, because like I said, we share the same issues, and I think we're going to learn from each other, and we're all going to be successful. And those who have not thought about trying electric bus technology, I think after today, I hope that this panel has inspired you in some way, shape, or form. And we hope you try electric bus technology and perhaps join Qtrix, because Qtrix will help lead the way to get you to be GHG free. Thank you.
We did not plant the shameless plugs, but we'll take them. So thanks so much. A great, fantastic group of people, a lot of passion, as you can tell, a lot of experience, and just uber amounts of wealth of knowledge and a willingness to share. So with that, we're going to turn to some questions for our panelists, and we do have the 2 microphones open, and I am sure that there are loads of people who want to know a little bit more about the deep, dark secrets and the great optimistic outcomes. So with that, we're going to launch right into a couple questions to get things started. First off, we're going to ask each transit agency, again, kind of parliamentary rules, try and get it out there in 60 seconds. What would you say has been the biggest win and the biggest fail, if you had to summarize, in terms of your progress through from where you started a couple years ago to where you are right now? So if it had to be the biggest win and the biggest fail, if you could do it again, this is what you'd do again, and if you could win it again, you'd repeat it exactly the way it was. What were those from your experiences? And Mike, we'll start with you at Toronto.
So I think probably the biggest win for us, or really a surprise, is just the acceptance from our staff, operators, maintainers. We expect a lot of pushback, new technology. Hey, who's plugging the bus? I need to get paid more. Or I'm working on a high voltage electric bus. I need to get paid more. Or I don't want to touch it. I'm scared because it's dangerous and I don't want to get electrocuted. So we expected these types of pushbacks, but it's actually been completely the opposite. I think everybody's very excited that we're going green. I think they like the technology. I think they like that the bus is smoother, quieter. Our patrons are happier, so I'm sure they're giving operators less of a hard time. And I'll share a quick story if I can do it in 30 seconds. But our very first bus that we dispatched, we actually had some issues with it on the road in the first couple of days. And we had that operator come in the next morning for that shift an hour early just to talk to our engineering team to understand, did he do something wrong? Because he did not want to get pulled off that bus. So much he liked driving that bus. So I think that's been key, is just us communicating with our staff well in advance of this program coming, and so that they know what's coming, what are the benefits, and they're all on board, and it's been really good for acceptance. On the downside, we've had challenges with dispatching buses, mostly with trying to get charge events, getting our staff trained, knowing when the bus should be charged, knowing when it has sufficient charge to put it on routes, and educate in that sense. And we've had some instances where we've missed service because we don't have an operator trained, or that bus just didn't have enough charge to go out in service because it just didn't get charged overnight and nobody was monitoring carefully. But we've worked through those struggles, and it's typical growing pains for new technology.
That's fantastic. So deployment pluses and some deployment lessons learned. But over the years, we've heard a lot about labor and the worries around labor. It's gotten less and less, I think, now with these experiences. But we used to hear, no, we can't. We've got a union. It's really strong. It's going to be really hard. But people are people. And just because labor is organized doesn't mean it's oppositional. And I think there's a great opportunity here to learn from how you've managed labor relations to get people to buy in. And Scott, over to you.
So for Brampton, I think, working with our OEMs on the charger side and the bus side, somebody said it earlier, the equipment's the equipment. So that's the easy part, I think, in all of this so far. We haven't launched yet, so we'll see if that stands true. I think for us, the biggest fail really was the loss of the 8.3 million from the provincial government that really ripped the rug out from under our feet. Literally we had to start from scratch, and transitioning back to the biggest win, obviously, was the 11.3 million we were awarded by the federal government. 70% funding on a project is unheard of. The federal government funding the purchase of buses is really unheard of directly. So that's definitely one of our biggest wins. But I think aligning it all was the biggest challenge out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the lessons we and as a group was, the feds coming in and saving the day, but saying, and quite rightly, look, the federal taxpayer can't always save the day. That communities have to figure out a way to make this happen without federal ministries stepping in to save the environmental story. So great lessons learned on the financial and funding side. Dom?
Sorry, I guess.
Yeah. It should be, yeah.
Hello? Okay, I guess for us, so we are almost a week deep in having these 2 buses operating, 2 to come. I think the biggest surprise is the technology isn't really a pilot technology anymore. We're doing something very specific in QTRIC, checking interoperability with systems that have never integrated before. But the buses and the chargers that we've not heard anything from the operations, which is great. So it's working, and it's working as we wanted. So I think dispelling the myth internally and to others that this is not a demonstration of pilot technology anymore is really valuable. And I said in my presentation, we really underestimated the resources needed for organizational change. I heard it from Edmonton last year. I talked to those folks, and they said, well, we've had thousands of hours working on this now. And I say, well, it's not us. We're going to do better. We've had thousands of hours working on this as well. So really, 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 you need to have a large team, committed resources to make it successful. So that was our challenge.
And to that point, we're hoping to have Paul Nesbitt here and the Edmonton Transit team. We couldn't make it happen, but next year for sure, because they got that right up front, a great in-depth project management approach, I think. And per your point, Dom, one of the things we used to hear a lot of was, look, is this an R&D pilot or is it commercialization? And OEMs never like hearing that this is R&D. And so our position was, that's why we don't call this a pilot. I know a lot of people call it a pilot. It's not a pilot, it's an integration trial. And there's a difference. The individual units are commercial, the integration is not yet commercialized, though hopefully that has changed. And so great points there in terms of getting over that hump with a lot of labor resources. Anne-Marie?
Okay, so I'm an optimist, and I don't feel like there was any failures at all. I mean, it's been a long, hard road to get where we are today, but it's all been positive. We did get ultimately where we wanted to go. Maybe took a little bit longer than we wanted to, but we're here, and we're ready to go with that trial, that demonstration, and it's brought a lot of people together as well. I mean, with Newmarket Tay Hydro, it's brought a lot of people even internally. We have a really close relationship now with our environmental services people because the greening strategy is theirs to deliver, and we're going to be the ones that deliver that for them. So I think it's all been very positive. Yes, it's been difficult, but there's nothing negative about anything that we've done at this point.
I concur. So in the world of relativity physics, we say there's an infinite number of ways for a unit or any kind of subatomic particle to get from point A to point B. And I think that this is a great example. You eventually get to point B. There's just an infinite number of ways to eventually get there. So with that, we're going to turn to the audience and remind folks that if you do have questions for the transit agencies, make sure to line up so that we do have query time for them. But I'm going to turn to you, Dom, to start the next question. We've got a lot of folks here from Winnipeg Transit in the audience. What is the piece of advice that you would offer to Winnipeg Transit specifically if they're thinking about moving electric in a city context in a provincial jurisdiction? That's a little bit tough. Not everything's aligned necessarily. They've had some experience with electric buses here, but it's going to be a long haul ahead. And in your presentation, you didn't tell us, is it going to be depot or en route? And so could you give some insight to Winnipeg Transit? They're about to start going through the same thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what we could do different. So for our low carbon fleet strategy, sometimes I say when you do your route analysis, you're basically putting a square peg in a round hole. Because what you're doing is taking a brand new existing technology and trying to fit in what you're already doing. So we're trying to fit battery technology into the existing routes. I think what would be really valuable, probably very costly too though, is to look at the technology and design your transit route based on battery buses, not based on diesel technology. That's what we're doing and that's where we're at right now. But I think there might be a couple agencies who are saying, well, we're going to do that as well because we have to, but what if we designed it just with battery technology? What would it look like then? I think we'd probably get a bit of different perspective and maybe a different breakdown of what is a depot and what is an en route. So if you have the resources to do so, and of course, for us at TransLink, we have great leadership. We have, I think you mentioned having the policy, so we do have formal adopted board policy of greenhouse gas reductions and renewable energy, which has been a catalyst in moving us forward. So when we go to an operations or maintenance or someone who's like, well, what's this battery? Why are we doing this? Well, we have these commitments that we've made at the Board of Mayors Council level. So tone from the top and design for with the technology in mind, not just what you've already been doing.
So reiterating a little bit about the message that John shared from ProTerra, which is basically design around the technology to some extent, stop thinking from the diesel perspective, as Kirk said. And from the TTC perspective, advice to Winnipeg Transit, if they were thinking this way, since the two of you have buses out on the road?
So I echo Dom's recommendations for modeling. I think it's very important to understand where you're going to put these buses and how you're going to launch them. Will they even work from a modeling perspective? And I mean, it's just communication through the organization. Bring all your stakeholders to the table. Understand what everybody's concerns are from the get-go and address those early so that you have a successful project launch. If you don't include all your stakeholders and you just assume that you're satisfying their needs or requirements, it's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt you at the wrong time when it's too late to make changes and satisfy their needs. And then you have discontent in the organization and it's going to impede your launch. So definitely bring all the stakeholders to the table, including the public, accessibility community, everybody, and just understand what everybody wants and needs, what are the impacts to their operations, and how you can work around to make sure that you meet all their needs.
That's great. And Michael, we're going to turn to you for our first question.
Yeah, this is just a question of clarification around some of the numbers that I'm hearing this morning. I'm here to learn, and I hear on the one hand that I think somebody said 60 or 65% of the energy consumed goes to HVAC. Presumably that's an annual average because it'll vary from winter to summer and so forth. Yet on the other hand, I'm hearing that putting a diesel heater in the bus only reduces the reduction in GHGs from 95 to 91%. Some of that isn't kind of adding up in my mind, and I'm wondering whether I'm misunderstanding that or whether there's more to it.
Yeah, I think the 65, I think so the two options, to run a battery, run the heating system on the battery, and that's where you're getting that draw. If you don't do that, the option is to use a diesel heater. So you're not using any of the battery capacity for heating of the bus. So there's two different scenarios. We haven't chosen, well, we'll see what we go with.
But I think
so that's where you're getting the
I
difference.
understand
from.
that, but if the heating consumes more than half of the total electrical energy of the vehicle, then how can that only result, replacing it with a diesel, only result in such a small reduction in the GHGs reductions?
So here I'll offer a little bit of insight, and I welcome inputs from the team, but essentially we've heard the question before, and what you're pointing to, Michael, is really the difference between energy density and the pollution and emissions factor. And in this case, you know, if we could rewrite history, we would never use electricity for heating. It is not, using electrons to generate heat is a really poor usage of the scientific principles of not just combustion, but thermal heat exchange. So you just wouldn't use electricity for heating. It's a very inefficient system. Conversely, if we could rewrite history, we would never use diesel and petroleum for propulsion. From an energy efficiency standpoint, we've got a lot of energy density, but we get a really inefficient engine system when you try and combust and use explosions to propel vehicles. So we've got the inverse, and as a result of that, when you use electric heating, it's very inefficient, draws your battery pack, but it doesn't create a huge amount of GHGs. On the flip side, to create heat from petroleum combustion is quite easy because it's a heat engine, but it doesn't actually cause that many GHGs because you don't need that much diesel to create a huge amount of heat. So essentially, it's GHG emissions intensity is not the same as energy and density, and I think often the way we present it, it seems like it should be a zero-sum game, and it's not. And we often do talk about that, the energy efficiency of an overall system versus the energy intensity or energy density of the system.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Does that make sense? Okay, great. So with that, Abhishek, we'll turn to you for a quick question.
Sure. Thanks, Josipa. So first of all, I would like to thank the panelists. You have truly been the pioneers, like the Canadian version of Lewis and Clark on an electric bus. So kudos to that. And like I have been leading the project along with Josipa from the Qtrix side. So I have been I've been kept abreast of all the development that's taking place. So that my question is like, based on the experiences that you had in our phase 1, how do you think that we can engage the municipalities better? Because municipalities is our first level of contact, and normally Qtrix interacts with the transit agencies, and it is you people who go and interact with the municipalities. So we want to make sure that that level of interfacing goes on really smoothly, so that we can take it up to like higher level, that is provincial, and directly to the federal level. And this is important because we are planning phase 2. And when I'm saying this, I'm looking at you, Mike. We are planning phase 2. So you know what to do. So yeah, that's my question.
Okay, so it's also underlying it a political question, and perhaps we can speak to your experience. How did you engage your council? And a lot of you presented the fact, well, and you're a little bit different, Dom, in the sense that it's provincially regulated. It's a kind of crown corporation of the province. But for the rest of the three of you, it was not so much, correct me if I'm wrong, you engaging your council. It's your council saying thou shalt go zero emissions, and then you engaged. And so can you explain to us and take us through a little bit your engagement with your council? Was it tense? Was it always workable? And what was the way of communication to get your council behind you 100%, even when the cost profile and the complexity started to become real?
So our original plan was to propose a very small program of between 1 to 5 buses to experiment with and learn from. That quickly got accelerated with PTIF and with outside pressures and council looking at other agencies like LA Metro that were all over the news saying that they were going to buy 120 buses. And so, they basically challenged us to go with a larger fleet. And after our analysis, we were comfortable with going with 30 buses based on energy available. And then they still challenged us to go with a larger fleet, not really understanding all the implications and challenges, especially on the infrastructure side. What I would say for the next step, really to get council on board, I think now it's 2 things. One is really delivering on your initial program, get it on time, get it on budget, get it buses in service, and then really is trying to now back up your projections for your original cost calculations for operating costs and maintenance costs and reliability, and now backing those up with actual data. And I think once you can go to council and say, we deliver our project on time and on budget, here's now our numbers for buses in service, and they're performing the way we expect them to. Here are the actual savings. We think that's a viable project. I think at that point it's a much more compelling argument to get them on your side to try to get that funding for full-scale electrification.
That's great. And Scott, you had a lot of interactions with town council, or city council rather.
Yeah, so for us it was more of an interactive discussion. It wasn't so much top-down, you shall go electric. Going back 5 years, it was more of a conversation around what can we do to improve the environment, and certainly going green and electrifying our fleet was one of the key recommendations that we moved forward. So, fast forward through another council, a new council, the theme has always been Brampton is a green city, and that's clear in our vision. It's clear that our mandate is to become green and carbon zero as much as possible. So the funding has remained there, and as has the commitment from senior leadership as well as our council. I think in order to engage other municipalities potentially in phase 2 and beyond, you really need to look at the funding element of the project, and that's one of the key challenges that we've faced, especially at the municipal level where capital and operating budgets are extremely tight. There's many competing priorities corporately, that transit's just one of those other priorities, but you look at the cost of a conventional diesel bus at, call it 680,000. You look at a cost of an electric bus at, call it 1.2 million. You're almost double the cost, although you're seeing a return over time. To Sasha's earlier point, council doesn't think in terms of a 20 or 30-year budget, and I think that's something we need to start having a conversation with them on, because the returns based on our modeling is there. It's just how do you get that capital investment through debt issuance or through the tax base now to reap that reward in the future.
Yeah, and to be fair to councillors, I mean, councillors only know what they know. They're regular people just like the rest of us. And one time we were asked by Thunder Bay Transit to model out their fleet, and we did. And then they asked us to come up and present to town council or city council, and we did. And what was supposed to be like a 15 or 20-minute back and forth just query about it turned into, I think, 2 hours by the time we were out of there. And you know, councillors were asking questions about drones and fuel cell tech, and because councillors don't know what they don't know, just like the rest of humanity, right? And they're listening to the news. So I think your points about real deep engagement over time, whether it's financial innovation or about the actual costs, is critical because councillors are just people, and they're certainly not oppositional until they're made to be. And Dom?
Yeah, I think you're right. For us, we didn't have a ton. We were governed by a mayor's council who really pushed us to do this, which was great. But what we're doing now a lot is more provincial representative engagement. And I think the big piece for us is they just don't know the kind of investments this takes. They're used to personal vehicles, and you know, some of the grant programs, Green Infrastructure Fund, they've been focused on personal vehicles or $50,000, $100,000, $1 million grants. One charger costs $1 million to $1.5 million. So when we're talking to government now, we're saying they're really supportive of what we're doing, but it's a bit of a reality check. Okay, it's going to cost $200 million by 2025 to support what we want to do. We don't have any of this money earmarked. We get a gas tax, which basically buys the buses for us, but there's a $200, $300, $400 million gap for infrastructure. So we started these conversations working with BC Hydro, BC Transit, our provincial representatives, and I'd say in the last month they're kind of getting their heads around what scale investment. $200 million isn't a lot in a provincial budget, but it is a lot for a transit agency to come up with.
That's right, in the grand scheme of things, but realizing at the time you're making the decision to allocate those funds is a big issue. And Anne-Marie?
Well, I think for us what worked in our favor is I actually have a very good relationship with our regional council. Again, we're a little bit different because we have 9 local municipal councils we have to deal with, and then some of those representatives sit at regional council. So we have a lot of councils to deal with. So it takes a lot of effort, but we do have a very close relationship with all 9 municipalities and their council, and of course that filters up to regional. So I think them having trust in you to deliver on time and on budget is certainly important. At the local level, they're very invested in green, whether it's recycling. Recycling's huge. Save the birds. Conservation, it's all important to them. So when you bring things like green technology to them at the regional level, they're pretty much already bought into it. And of course, there's always those champions on council, more so than the others. And again, you kind of work with those individuals to say, okay, well, how do we deliver the message that is impactful to everybody that's sitting around that table? And really they'll help us sort of design what that message is, and they'll help us really promote that message, and they'll put, let them put the other politicians on the spot. I'm not going to do it, but let them sort of, make the others sort of ante up and make that commitment towards going green.
Yeah, so get your political champions on the council to champion and cheerlead for you. Right. And I think there's a lot of folks in the room today from City of Winnipeg, and so I think just a great innovative city, a great innovative transit agency. There's a lot of opportunity to learn from this, and maybe one day we'll have to bring a traveling road show of councillors who are rah-rah cheerleaders from jurisdictions around Canada here to Winnipeg to help move the needle forward. With that, I'm going to turn to Karen Cameron at Opta for your question, Karen.
As quick as I can. There's been reference to the return on investment. What is the state of that calculation? How stable, I guess, is it, and how digestible is it? In our first meeting with the new Minister of the Environment back in January, the meeting began with him making the statement that, oh yeah, there's no calculation where there's any return on investment in electric buses, and it was just a statement. And that's not a partisan thing either. He got that calculation from the bureaucracy that was there when the Liberals were in power and they had the Climate Change Action Plan. So it wasn't about it being the new PC government. They just were using, as Anne-Marie said, a calculation that looked at the transit business model as exactly the same as the private car business model. So where are we at with that? And is it digestible for a transit manager who's taking it to their council, and has that ship sailed of having to make that business case?
Yeah, and to that point, Karen, I mean, so we're sitting in that room, for folks who were not sitting in that room with us, and Karen and I were asking the minister's office, essentially, where'd you get these numbers from, and they couldn't tell us. And then they said, go ask the Ministry of Environment. So we went, and they couldn't tell us. Nobody actually had the numbers, but everybody was certain that $1 of tax money spent to electrify transit would not pay off. So everybody's absolutely certain. Nobody could tell us where they actually came up with the numbers or calculated it. So 2 questions in the back end there, Karen. One is, what is your system thinking in terms of return on investment? So is there a yearly calculation? I know we did our modeling, but you may have your own internal ones. What's that return on investment? And from an emissions standpoint, what's your view in terms of $1 of taxes spent electrifying transit results in what kind of GHG benefits down the road in terms of impact? We'll start, Mike, with yourself.
So I think there's something that we struggle with, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to go green, but I think not too many people can stomach the costs that are associated with going green sometimes. And this is very high capital costs up front. It's something that we're working on with the business case, and it's a challenge. And I hate to share numbers, firstly because we're not finished our business case, but also we don't really have real numbers at this point. We're entering our 3rd month of operations. We're starting to get some numbers now on the cost of operating these buses. We don't know what the maintenance is like. We don't know what the long-term costs are like for an overhaul program, and so there's a lot of assumptions out there. From my own, my personal thoughts on this, because I've run numbers, I think it's going to be very comparable over the life cycle of the bus. I think it's comparable to a hybrid bus. I think it's going to be a wash. And to me, if it's a wash, I think we're already, I think that's a win, because it's a wash cost-wise, but from a green standpoint, it's obviously much cleaner. So, and the second question, that one's a tough one too, only because like, what's the price on green? Like, what value do you put on reducing that greenhouse gas? And that's like the magic question, and that's really what I think the solution is for all the funding problems we have, is if somehow we could attribute that reduction in GHG to some dollar value, that's the money, that's the missing piece of the puzzle to get money to pay for all this new technology and an adoption. But I don't know the answer to that. I think it's going to be a joint effort between all agencies and QTRIC and bus OEMs and charger OEMs and utility companies. But I think together we need to figure out what's that value and convince people that there is this monetary value. We've been doing some work recently with C40, trying to look at other ways to put value on that with impacts to health, and that's something that's ongoing. And I think that's going to produce some really good numbers too that people don't even consider of having a fully electric fleet and what that does to health costs for our health networks and improving a quality of life for people. So these are all things that are ongoing. I think in the next 2 years there's going to be some really big advancements, and you get a lot better data because there's more buses in service. And we should have a better answer for you, Karen, in maybe 1 or 2 years. But I hope that at the bare minimum, if we're equal to a hybrid, I think it's a win.
So equal to or better than a hybrid, and potentially if we can get a price point of $20, $50, $200 a metric ton, we'd actually be able to run those calculations, plus what we've called in the past the dead babies figure, which is a terrible thing to use, but how many kids die from asthma-related illnesses or heart attack from asthma-related or diesel pollutants? If we had a number, a macabre number to attach to diesel pollutants, we'd probably get this movement forward quicker. And Scott?
Yeah, so similar to Mike's answer, I mean, we've done some internal estimates based on industry experience in terms of, the maintenance and operation of e-buses in North America. We've heard different numbers from the OEMs, and we've kind of used a conservative estimate for the maintenance savings that we expect based on our experience with our diesel hybrid electrics. So again, similar to Mike's comment, I think it's going to be very close to that of what we're experiencing now with our 123 diesel hybrid electrics. You look simply at the capital cost of a diesel bus versus the capital cost of an electric bus, and you take that over an 18-year bus life, you look at the fuel savings and the maintenance savings year over year, and you do end up with a positive return at the end of it. So again, we'll be going through much more detailed analysis as we get through our project and actually get our buses on the road. But that's just on the bus side, right? So then you have to factor in the charger side. And in Brampton, we're going to own and operate 4 chargers. There's been talk with Electra to potentially transition those assets longer term, and they may have an interest longer term. There's been some conversations with OPG, but when we go live, we're going to be the owners and operators of the chargers. We don't know what costs come with those and how that's going to impact our ROI at the end of the year, at the end of 5 years, let alone the end of 18 years. When the life cycle of these are, probably around 10 or 12 years. So we're not sure what the maintenance and operation of the chargers is going to do to the ROI, but on the bus side alone, we expect a positive return over the life of that bus.
Okay, so time will tell as we figure out that ROI on the infrastructure.
Yeah, just quickly, so we've done the life cycle cost modeling as well, and the same thing, it pretty much comes out to equal as what we do baseline diesel. But one thing we didn't factor in, but we understand is there is a price on carbon, and we actually get it at TransLink. We have compressed natural gas that we sell to other fuel suppliers in British Columbia. So we have a low carbon fuel standard program in BC. Last year, through the province, the average price of selling a carbon metric ton was, I think, $180 per metric ton. So that's a very strong market. So we've done some analysis on what electrification of our fleet would bring in annually from carbon credits if we got them, and it's around $20 million a year. So add that over 20 years, 30 years, that outpaces the diesel argument. So it's not even an argument anymore. So there is a price, and we don't think that program is going away. So yeah, there's definitely a price, and we're going to monetize it.
And obviously over 20, 30 years, the price goes up, so the money increases, right? Anne-Marie?
High five to BC Hydro.
Who's going to lose that money if it transitions over, but we won't talk about that right now.
It's not a loss. It will be anything incremental going forward will be reinvested in the sector, so please don't.
Win-win, win-win scenario.
No,
That's
It's
fantastic.
been fantastic.
And Anne-Marie?
So I don't think I can really add anything to what these three gentlemen said, other than an interesting point was made was that human factor. And that's something that we haven't considered into our calculation, is what is the impact to the environment and as far as a health, from a health perspective. So I think that's maybe something we need to do going forward, because we can crunch numbers and we can divvy them up either which way, but there is other costs associated with what we're doing, and I think we need to include that in our calculation.
Absolutely. And I'm really sorry, folks, we've run out of time and you've stood there so patiently. What I'm going to ask you to do, though, is articulate your question, and we're going to conclude on your questions as questions to return to. So we'll start here. If you want to just let us know, what was the question?
Kevin Sturgeon with Winnipeg Transit. The question was, battery electric buses are heavier than other buses, and heavy vehicles damage roads. So have any of your jurisdictions considered whether this will have a significant effect on greenhouse gas emissions and cost of the road rehabilitation cycle?
And something for us to come back to in our next panel, where, Mike, you're going to be on the panel. In any case, talking about evidence, we've definitely talked about the idea of heavier buses and infrastructure impact. So if you can hold on to that question, I think the next panel is going to have a little bit of insight. At least, Mike, I'm going to task you with that. And the second question?
Sure. Boris Kaganovich, LTK. Question, how much is real estate space a bottleneck for charging infrastructure? And then also a follow-up of, do chargers scale in terms of if you buy more, do they get cheaper per unit?
All right, a quick answer to that, yes. But back to the next panel in terms of real estate and space constraints. Some of our panelists respond to that. And then the roadway infrastructure degradation, the impact on GHGs and unintended consequences of electrification. With that, I'm going to thank our panelists for a fantastically insightful, from the transit agency perspective, electrification discussion.